What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Fish at the Moment. Today I'm with Randy, and we're going to be going through his tournament prep for the upcoming Bassmaster Open on Sam Rayburn Lake. I thought it'd be cool to actually have Randy walk you through his Google Earth and Navionics map study for this event, as well as talk through his tournament strategies. So, Randy, how's it going today?
Doing good, Johnny. Just starting to get into that tournament mode mindset right now. So do a little map study and starting getting prepped for this Rayburn tournament.
Awesome. Well, let's just get right into it. What is your plan for this upcoming Rayburn event? Kind of strategy at a high level?
My plan in this tournament is, like I said, I cannot compete with the locals down there that traditionally fish in the deep water in September at Rayburn. I've never fished down there in September before. I got a lot of experience on the lake during the pre-spawn, but not anything this time of year. So I know for my own self, in order for me to compete in this tournament, I have got to develop some type of a shallow water pattern. And that means me going into upper creek arms, upper river arms. And for example, this is sort of my plan here, looking at the Navionics map. Um, you can see here in the upper Ash Bayou of Rayburn and in the upper river section up here, all this particular area that I'm drawing the circle around here, you got, I'm real familiar with Rayburn, so I know what this looks like up here, but you got a good mix of a lot of shallow cover. In the backs of all these areas here, you've got a lot of cypress trees, you got lily pads, you've got buck brushes. If the water gets flooded up in the bushes, you're going to have some emergent and submergent grasses along the banks, like in all these coves here. Like right here, you're going to have a good mix of aquatic vegetation, pads, that type of stuff, isolated cypress trees. So I know for me to do well in this tournament, that I have got to develop some type of a shallow water pattern that I can catch in that mid to upper teens, approaching 20-pound mark. And I feel like if I commit to this type of water right here, these upper arms, backs of the creeks, upper reaches, um, I may not have the ability to catch those mega bags of fish like that are potentially there on the lower end of the lake. But if I maximize the water in these particular areas and I key in on some subtle stuff that is drawing some better bites, I know that I can probably be competitive in this water up there if I can figure that out.
And what type of stuff are you looking for up there specifically? Maybe switching over to Google Earth, you could zoom in and show us like some of the bushes or grass lines or something that you're trying to fish, because I think a lot of guys would be interested to see what you're targeting specifically.
Yeah, like on this one, we'll go up the Angelina River right here. The upper portions of it. This is actually the area that I fished in our last FLW tournament we had up there. And I was at that particular time, I was flipping bushes in the tournament. Water was high, but out here on the flats, you can see all these out here. These are isolated cypress trees out here, and I'm assuming, and I'm pretty confident that a lot of these cypress trees are going to have some probably some hydrilla growth around them when we come there next week. And the farther you get back in here, you're going to have some pads mixed in there a little bit. Shallow grasses, bushes. There's a lot of mix of shallow wood and aquatic vegetation in this particular area up here. So here again, it's a big area. There's a lot of different opportunities, for the fish to use shallow water. So my game plan, the first day of practice, is I'm probably going to run up into this particular water here, sort of find out where the flooded vegetation is, maybe fish some cypress trees, see what type of shallow water cover is available, and that's going to give me a starting point on day one.
And up here, it just looks like if you zoom out, there's just like a massive amount of cover. And I think that's one thing a lot of guys get overwhelmed by, especially if they're practicing for an event, is how do you go through an area where there's 10,000 cypress trees, 100 million yards of flooded vegetation, and the shallow bushes? How do you dial it in a practice, like say a 1, 2, or 3 day practice period, to the stretches you're going to fish in the tournament?
Well, like in this particular area here, I'll probably come idling up through here and I'll see what's available out in the open water here. These areas out here, you might have a mix of lily pads and some type of hydrilla, aquatic vegetation. There could be some hayfield grass up along the bank there. I'll probably start out, maybe fishing the offshore cover, the pads, shallow grass, maybe fishing a frog or a buzzbait around it. try that for a couple hours. If I'm getting bit, I can expand on that into other areas up in here. And then say, for example, it's not working. I'm just not getting anything else at all. I may move in here and start pitching and flipping around some of these shallow laydowns like you see through here. And then if that's working, I'll expand that. If that's not working, after an hour, I might move out here deeper and maybe target some of these isolated cypress trees out here. Fish around the roots of the cypress trees. There may be some hydrilla growing out away from the trees. I may fish some of that hydrilla. It's basically just sampling the cover, see what's available out there, and give something a decent amount of time to try it. Like I said, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. And then if I'm not getting bit, move on. But in this particular area out here, if I can scroll out and show you here, this is a vast area. And this is something that you could simply not cover in a day's time of fishing. So, yeah, there's a better picture of it right there. So what you have in here is if you do get a few bites in here, say if I move in this area right here and I get 2 or 3 bites in the first couple hours, that's going to give me a lot of confidence to expand and look at this entire area back in here, break it down. And here are the big keys, Johnny, when you're fishing and you're committing to shallow water here on Rayburn or in any lake, is you have to make that commitment. You can't come in here for an hour or two, not get a bite, bail out, and run down the lake 40 miles. You have to make the commitment to basically learn the area better than anybody else in the tournament. And that's how you do well in shallow water, is you become intimate with those areas that you're fishing, and you know where the better fish are setting up on, you know where the key targets are, and you can maximize your time better than anybody else once you get up in that water.
That's really cool because it's an approach that I never really take in my tournament preparation. I lose confidence in the shallow, vast, expansive areas like that very quickly. So that's probably why I haven't been successful in them over the years. Moreover, I really like that you talked about the amount of time you spent sampling like different elements. So you'll spend 45 minutes to an hour sampling one type of cover in a certain depth range, then you're switching and changing. And if you think about that, if you do that over 3 days, if you have, let's say, 12 hours in the water, well, every hour you're sampling something different. You can sample 36 different combinations of cover, depth, and area, or like, proximity to the shore in that 8 hours. And in that, I would assume you would find something that's holding some decent fish, which is a really smart approach, in my opinion.
Well, here's my sort of theory on shallow water fishing versus deep water fishing. Everybody sort of thinks that, deep water fishing almost like it requires a higher intellect a little bit. And that's not true, because fishing is fishing, and there are details, whether you're fishing deep or shallow, there are subtle details that make a big difference. Now, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about as far as the art of shallow water fishing. Let's go back in here and find some isolated laydowns here. Okay, say we come in here and we find a few isolated laydowns, and say this particular area here has there may be 100 isolated laydowns in this particular area of the backwater. Now, say you roll in here and you can't get any bites flipping laydowns, but they're in the perfect water depth, water clarity looks good. Maybe you're seeing some bait fish moving around. Instead of bailing out on that, I may make a bait change. Instead of pitching some type of a creature bait, maybe I go to a straight-tailed worm, or maybe I go to a tube or a jig. And if I start getting bites on that particular setup, I'll try to refine that a little bit more, and I'll experiment a little bit more with colors and maybe weight sizes on the particular bait that I'm using, until I narrow it down to where I've got what I feel is the best lure, the best color, the best weight, the best line size, the best approach to the area. And so what I've done is I've taken just this generic aspect of flipping laydown wood in the upper part of the river, and I've actually broken it down into some fine, detailed points that makes all the difference in the world whether you're going to get a bite or not. And when you're fishing shallow water cover and you're trying to maximize an area like I'm trying to do this tournament, I'm trying to compete with all the Todd Castledines that are going to be fishing all this offshore brush down the lake. In order to do that, I have to master this particular area. I have to know this area better than anybody else. I have to understand the behavior and the movements of the bass in this particular area, and I have to understand what will generate a strike from these fish, because I know that there's a population of bass in this area right here to win the tournament. I mean, there's no doubt that there's 15 4 to 5 pound bass swimming around out here somewhere. I just have to figure out what's going to generate those strikes and to maximize my opportunities.
Now, Randy, other than experience, what led you to this particular section? If, let's say, you're going here and maybe you hadn't found this section in the past, so you had no experience here, what mood made you pick that little flat right there as opposed to going further up the creek or the river, going into a different creek, going up a different arm? Or are you going to sample all those different areas throughout practice?
Well, normally, like I said, September is a big transition month in bass fishing on man-made lakes, and normally September is one of the toughest months of the year to fish by far. And you have a lot of fish that start to move shallow, and you can actually, excuse me, you can actually start to win fishing shallow in September in some man-made lakes. My decision, like in this particular area here, is this particular section of Rayburn. It's the last big flat before the lake turns actually into the old Angelina River channel. And once you get up in the river channel here, you don't have the diversity of cover that you have on the flat here, because here you have such a huge mix of cover. You've got grass, you've got wood, you've got a lot of different options. But once you get up in the river, you simply don't have those options. Now, other places, like for example, on Table Rock Lake, or I'll use Table Rock or even Lake of the Ozarks, for example, you want to be farther up the river because you have prime cover up there. You have docks, you have rocks, you have wood, you have bluff banks. But on the Angelina River, on Sam Rayburn, just from the experience I have there, traditionally you don't have it's not, the habitat in the river is not as good as the adjacent flat is before it dumps into the river down there. So it's sort of like it's a combination of my experience on Rayburn, and it's a combination of my experience on other lakes that made me choose this particular area right here.
Gotcha. So you're really looking for that diversity of cover, especially as a shallow water angler. That makes sense. And if you're thinking about what we talked about earlier, if you're trying to find 20 or 30 different combinations of cover, depth, and locating part of the lake, if you don't have more than 2 types of cover, it's hard to build and expand on anything. So I get what you're saying, where you have lily pads, laydowns, cypress trees, hydrilla, maybe bushes, all these different things. That makes perfect sense. And something that I never really thought about shallow fishing either. I just go into an area where I'm like, oh, this is up a creek. And I don't think about the diversity of cover at all.
Well, here's what you have to realize in tournament fishing. Tournament fishing is all about correctly assessing and judging the potential that an area has to do well in it. Now, a lot of people, when they get started out, they tend to either underestimate or overestimate the potential of their area. This particular area that I'm showing you right here, this has all the potential to win a tournament in. It's a big area. It has a diverse mix of cover. It is situated in the lake to an area that has a lot of nutrients coming into the lake. It's really fertile. It's a long way from any boat ramps, so people have to make a sort of a semi-treacherous run up here through standing timber that's unmarked to get to it. So you won't have the fishing pressure in through here. This is the type of area I look for when I'm fishing shallow water. I want something that's a little bit hard to get to, a little bit remote, maybe a place that doesn't have a lot of notoriety, but it offers enough cover to support me for 3 or 4 days in the tournament. And that's what's key. In order to win these tournaments or place high, you have to have an area that's either large enough or has enough of a diverse mix of cover to not only support yourself for 3 or 4 days in the tournament, but if you have a half a dozen other boats up here milling around, which I expect there will be in the tournament of that size that we're fishing, that area has got to be able to support that type of fishing pressure. And when you break down a lake, there's not a lot of areas like that. there's not a lot of places you can go and have like a square mile of water that you could potentially win in. You either have small areas like this, or you have like patterns or sections of the lake that could possibly produce tournament wins. But for me to win this tournament, or to even place high in this tournament, I have got to catch them in an area like this. May not be this particular area, but it's going to be an area set up just like this.
Gotcha. Now, let's say you get up to this part of the lake and you just don't like the look of that flat right there. How are you then going to adjust that strategy from what you prepped in practice?
Well, for example, if say I roll in here the first day of practice and I don't do any good, and I give it all day long and I break it down and it's just nothing happening. The second day of practice, I'll probably make a move, and let me scroll out here a little bit more. I'll probably make a move up to the Angelina River arm, up this other arm right here. I mean, yeah, the Ash Bayou, I'm sorry. And I'll scroll in here. Now, this is going to be a similar setup. It's just going to be laid out a little bit differently. Excuse me, I'm sort of getting over a cold here, guys. But here's what we're talking about in this particular area here. It's the same type of deal. Back into the major creek arm here, flattens out. You have a lot of siltation. Got a lot of nutrients coming into the lake. You're going to have a lot of same type of cover. You're going to have a diverse mix of the cypress trees, laydowns, emergent grasses and through here. Sort of a complex area, same type of deal set up. And I'll probably do that the second day of the tournament. Putt around in here, experiment a little bit. And if I don't get any bites back in the shallow area, back in through here like this, I may start working my way out a little bit further into the creek. Scan out here a little bit more. And I may start trying some of this other stuff that's adjacent to the back of that flat there, isolated cover, bank grass. There could be some pads like in the backs of this stuff right here, and start running some of that type of stuff. But it's not like I'm going to bail out and just run down by the dam if I'm not getting bit. I'm just going to gradually start working my way out. But I highly anticipate catching them back in this type of water in the tournament and practice coming up.
So let's say you go through 2 full days of practice and you have like the Doomsday scenario where you don't catch them up the Angelina River. You also don't catch them up here in Ash Bayou or whatever it was called. And you have their 3rd day of practice and you're like, I've fished both these areas up, feel pretty confident that I've covered them decently well. What would be your approach on that 3rd day of practice to try to salvage or maybe figure out something?
Yeah, that's a very likely scenario because like I said, there's no doubt that that could possibly happen like that. What's going to go down as far as if that happens in my personal situation here? I'm going to probably try to make a move down the lake a little bit further. I'm going to come back down into, like, say for example, the Harvey Creek area right here. And I know from past history that you have a lot of hydrilla growing out off the bank in Harvey Creek. You have a lot of hydrilla growing out off the bank in the Black Forest here. I'd probably spend the 3rd day of that practice doing nothing but flipping a big jig in some of the deeper hydrilla, thicker hydrilla clumps, and probably just commit to that. Try to see how many bites I could get with that because I look for that to be a pretty strong pattern in this tournament. I think there's probably going to be half the top 10s come flipping that deeper bank grass, if I had to guess.
So I'm just throwing some scenarios at you, Randy. I'll show you some tricky ones and some easier ones. So let's say that on your 1st day of practice, you absolutely crush them up the Angelina River. You catch 18 pounds 1st day of practice. What would you do after you just absolutely crushed them? Would you go back up there and try to expand the area, figure out different approaches and baits? Or would you try to find a backup area, maybe still checking these other 2 areas out? What would be your strategy there?
Yeah, here's my plan to that, and that is the ideal scenario. If you can get on them the 1st day of practice, where you can have 2 other days to expand on what you had an outstanding day at, that is an ideal tournament situation. Let's say, for example, I roll in here in this particular area, and I get maybe a dozen good bites, the first half a day of practice. What I'm going to do for the rest of the practice, and probably a good portion of the next day, I'm going to spend my entire second day of practice back up in this area right here, and I'm going to spend most of it on my trolling motor, maybe doing some idling, and just figuring out and seeing what every single square foot of this entire area looks like. I'm not going to leave any stone unturned in it. I'm going to look over every single aspect of it. This whole general region right here, where I figure is the juice on it. And if I do fish, I'll have my hooks cut off. I'll maybe experiment with some ways I feel that I can catch some bigger fish. But my goal is that I don't want to come up here for half a day, have a good day of practice, and leave it. I want to be able to know this area better than anybody in the tournament, and I want to be able to try to figure out where those fish are going to go if you have some type of a change or if they quit biting. So if this is my main area commitment, I'm going to spend 2 full days in there scouting and studying the area. And when I'm talking about studying it, I'm not talking about fishing necessarily. I'm talking about looking for subtle water clarity changes, maybe different subtle drops in the water depth. You may have some channels like in through here that have a little bit deeper water. There may be, for example, when I'm trying to fine tune an area, say I'm scouting this particular area, and I may find, like, say in the back of this pocket, there may be one beaver dam back there that's just like off the beaten path. But by me scouting the area with a fine-tooth comb, I may find that one little tiny beaver dam in the back of that cut, and that can produce a 4 or 5 pounder in the tournament and win the tournament. Now, expanding on that even more, say the next day of practice, the thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start working my way back down the lake here a little bit more. And I'm going to start looking for places that I could possibly hit on the way back down. Say, for example, I may go back in the back of this cove and look for some shallow pads or grass. It just, anything like this, the back ends that are something similar but smaller, places I can just work down and hit on my way back to the weigh-in.
Gotcha. Maybe pick up a few extra fish. So that's if you crush them up there in the Angeline River. So let's say that you go up there instead on your first day of practice and you get 3 bites. Your 3 bites are a 1.5-pounder, a 2-pounder, and maybe a 1-pound fish. You get 3 bites all day and you're like, it's just not really happening. You then go up to the Ashburn Bayou. You go up there, and let's say you only get another 2 or 3 bites, maybe 4 bites, maybe just enough to make you think, okay, if I fished here, I think I figured out a little bit something. I can catch about 10 pounds here. And then you go down to the Harvey Creek area and you get 2 6-pound bites flipping, but you fish for 12 hours and only got 2 bites. What would you do in that situation? So you have like nothing great in any of them, but you have big bites in one area. What are your thoughts on that?
Man, that's a tough scenario because a lot of that depends on how the overall bite's going on the lake, as far as getting a feel for what it's going to take to do well. Because you can pretty much guarantee that even though it's tough in September, it's still going to take quite a bit of weight to do good in this tournament. This particular tournament, I see at Rayburn, I think it's going to be top heavy. I think you're going to see 2 or 3 of the guys really catch big bags in the tournament, and I think everybody else is going to have a tougher time. In my particular situation, if that happened, I would definitely go with the low percentage big bites, flipping the jig in the thick hydrilla, and just keep that in my hand and do that all day long, and try to get 2 or 3, 4 or 5 of those bites in one day. But in order to do well in these tournaments, like I said, you can't take yourself away from the type of fish you'll do well in those tournaments. Because, like, I know, for example, here, like in Harvey Creek, lots of grass in Harvey Creek here. Everybody knows that there's going to be a ton of boats in this particular area. There'll probably be 20 or 30 boats in here every day of the tournament. And there's going to be somebody that does good in here. It's going to be the person that either gets on that little key stretch or has a bait that's maybe a little bit different color. So in that situation, I would commit to the grass for sure if I got 2 6-pound bites.
Gotcha. So let's say then you have the full doomsday scenario. This is, I'm giving you some hard ones here, Andy, but let's say you get two bites in all three areas and you don't hit a bite over 2 pounds. You have six keeper bites, 2 bites each day, and it's just a grind. Like, let's say you catch some little ones, but there's just nothing really happening, and you have nothing after your tournament practice. And I know that that's very unlikely, but it's probably happened to you at some point over
Oh
the
yeah.
past years where you just never figured out in any three areas. What's the plan then? Do you have like a backup? Like, if anything goes worse, I'm just going to go fish boat ramps and riprap and bridge pilings. Like, is there anything like that, or what would be your strategy then?
The best thing that I've found in my own fishing and sort of advice I'd give to anybody is if you just can't get anything going, you're having a super tough time. You have to fall back on the areas of the lake that traditionally produce a lot of fish. And I know, like I said here at Rayburn, that the big key areas at Rayburn are like the beach basin, the Five Fingers area here, Black Forest, Harvey Creek. That's where a lot of the action takes place. That's where a lot of the bigger bags. So I'd probably go, say for example, if I was flipping, the hydrilla out off the points in the Black Forest here, not catching anything, and I pushed over in Beach and Death and Harvey, I'd probably go like in the Black Forest area here, and I'd start moving farther back in these coves off the Black Forest, and I'd start like maybe looking for ditches leading into the back of these coves that have some type of grass or hydrilla out of the ditches leading into them. I might fish some hayfield grass along the edges. I might take just like a topwater buzzing frog and just try to cover as much as water as I can around everything that's got good shallow cover. But what I want to do is I want to stay in those areas that traditionally hold bigger numbers and bigger quality of fish. I'm not gonna go back up the river to like these low percentage areas that I don't feel like the bigger populations of fish in. I just want to put myself around where I feel the biggest groups of fish are and try to figure out catching them with different techniques.
That's super insightful, Randy. Because I think a lot of guys, like you said, they want to avoid fishing pressure and get away from the crowd. So often they take themselves away from where the fish actually are, and they think, well, if I didn't catch them here, I'm not going to be able to compete with all these boats who've been practicing in the community holes or the popular areas for 3 days. So they might try something completely off the wall, run to an area of the lake they've never been to, and just start randomly fishing. And that seems like it's like a recipe for disaster, as opposed to
Yeah.
your approach, which is salvage what you can, go to popular areas. And honestly, there's no point in you going into the Black Forest and throwing a topwater frog in the hay grass in practice, because you can probably go catch him doing that if you just did it all day. Instead, you're focused on trying to find those out of the way areas that could give you a chance to win, or at least find some fish for yourself. And then you have a fallback pattern, which I think is really important for, especially like a multiple day tournament, big field tournament.
Yeah. Well, I'll use Harvey Creek again as an example because Harvey Creek gets pounded. I mean, you got the big ramp right here, Castle Boykin ramp. A bunch of tournaments go out of here. Everybody runs right over Harvey Creek. It's one of the best creeks in the lake. A lot of tournaments get one out of here, but it's just a zoo in here with boats. And in this particular tournament that we're coming up on, I can promise you that every day of the tournament, like I said, there's going to be 20 to maybe 50 boats fishing in this creek right here, at least. And I can also promise you that probably 2 to 3 of the top 10 anglers will come out of this area right here. But there's going to be 80% of these anglers that struggle and don't even make a check right here. So what you sort of have to do is like when you make a decision to fish these community holes like this, you have to commit to doing that, and you have to really focus on uh, figuring out how to get those bites that other people are fishing for. Because most people come through here, like I said, if there's a hydrilla line out here, they're going to come in here and they're going to flip a black and blue beaver type bait on a 1 ounce sinker with 65-pound test braid. That's just what they're going to do. Maybe cast a old monster out off the edge of the grass. So you have to find something a little bit different than what everybody else is doing. That's just the big key to tournament fishing in community holes. Now you can get away with that if you've got some stuff to yourself, but um, it's it happens like this every tournament on these lakes that get lots of fishing pressure.
For sure. Well, that's really really insightful stuff, Randy. I think that a lot of guys are going to learn a lot from this video just in that. One last complication or wrinkle that's getting thrown in here is the weather that's coming in. Can you explain how you're preparing for that and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the weather in this particular tournament is at the forefront of my mind because they got that tropical storm, and I guess it's a hurricane Laura now that's going to hit uh, South Texas, Louisiana. And at this point, we don't know how much rain is going to come into the Jasper, Texas area. I looked on the weather forecast today, and they were expecting anywhere between, say, 3 to 5 inches of rain here around Rayburn. Now, what that's going to do is like 3 inches of rain is not going to do much. But if you get like 5 or 6 inches of rain in a heavy period of time, it's going to start muddying up a lot of the back ends of these areas here. And the river's starting to get some color in it. I don't know if we're going to get that big of a water level change. It possibly could come up a couple feet. But my main consideration is if you get a torrential amount of rain coming into these upper areas here, and these little feeder tributaries like here coming in here, if that washes this area out with mud right here, that's going to have some type of an effect on the fish. If the water level does not come up rapidly, that could actually be a plus because a lot of times you get a good amount of stained water, muddy water coming into the back of these creeks in late summer, early fall. As long as that water doesn't rise real quick, it'll actually activate those fish a little bit. So I'm looking for this hurricane system coming up to actually help. It's going to probably help what I want to do in the tournament. If I can get these fish fired up in this type of water, and I can have a little bit of color change or a little bit of water movement as far as just a little bit of rise in the water level, that can be all it takes to really create a situation where you can win up here. It could take all the advantage away from the lower end, and it could activate these bigger fish up here. And I can see how the tournament could easily be won in these type of areas with the weather system coming in like that.
Well, let's say then that instead of the weather coming up like the water coming up like a foot or two, what if it comes up like 3 or 4 or 5 feet? Like, what if we get hit hard? They get hit hard by rain. Would that dissuade you from even going up these rivers? Like, would that hurt the bite to the point where it's not fishable?
Well, if the water comes up, say 3 or 4 feet, it's gonna start. What it's going to do is going to negatively impact a lot of these flatter areas that have a lot of water coming down the river here or the backs of these creeks to where it turns it really muddy. It's going to negatively affect that. But what it's going to do, it's going to open up a lot of potential if you come back down the lake here and get into some of these areas that traditionally have cleaner water. But if you get a 3 or 4 foot rise back in some of these areas like Beach Basin, this is going to inundate a lot of buckbrush and willows in the backs of these coves, and you're not going to get a lot of mud coming in, but you're going to have this rising water, and a lot of these fish that are out in this hydrilla, out in the guts, could probably pull up into that shallow flooded cover, even the fish that are in the hayfield grass, and that could make a lot of these mid-area creeks become a lot better with a hard rise like that because if the lake comes up 4 or 5 foot, I'll probably, definitely look at a lot of this stuff down here that I normally wouldn't consider if it doesn't come up.
Gotcha. So your practice strategy then is pretty fluid. That's one thing I'm kind of getting from that last part of the discussion is that if the water rises or changes or the temperature changes, all these factors, even fishing pressure, I assume, could shift your strategy. And it's probably really important to stay flexible when you get out to the lake and not just say, I'm going to go this area day 1, this area day 2, this area day 3, stick with that, and then force that to work. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, definitely. When you're dealing with the Bass Open and you got 200 anglers in the tournament, plus you got heavy recreational fishing pressure on Sam Rayburn, fishing pressure becomes a big part of the variables the weather does. And I know from fishing Rayburn a lot in the past years that most of the activity you're going to see in this area right here. This is where you're going to have most of the action at as far as the fishing pressure. So you have to keep that in consideration because fishing pressure to me acts very similar to how it has a similar effect on the bass as like a cold front does, just in a different way. But bass can react. They react to an increase in motor noises. They react to an increase in electronic pings, trolling motor vibrations. So they're not stupid, and that has a big part to play in how I plan my tournament day out.
Got it. Well, Randy, this is awesome stuff. I think guys on YouTube are going to really enjoy this. Any last comments about your prep for Rayburn, or do you think we covered most of it?
Well, it's like I said, I've done this for so long. I mean, I've prepped for tournaments for so long. It's like every one of them is different, and every one of them is the same because there's always this anticipation and excitement going out to the lake, and there's also an anxiety that's attached to that because there's so many unknowns. And until you get to the lake and until you start breaking it down and start fishing a little bit, you don't really know if what your plan uh, is going to be effective or not. So that's sort of the stage I'm going through right now. I've got a lot on the line in this tournament. I'm doing really good in the point standings. I want to make sure I stay consistent, but at the same time, you can't fish safe. I can't go out there and be defensive. I've got to stay on the offense. Like I said, I got to keep being aggressive in how I fish, and to do that, you have to put fear out of your mind. You have to put fear of failure and fear of gambling out of your mind, because if you don't do that, you'll never excel in the sport. I mean, you have to take risks. You have to put yourself where you think that you can catch the better fish at, not what everybody else is going to catch, but you got to focus on the fish that you feel that you can catch better than anybody else in the tournament. And that's sort of what I'm going through my mind right now a little bit.
Got it. That's awesome. One last question for you, Randy. This might be a little tricky one, but I'm actually interested to see what happens at the end. What is your thoughts on the 3-day winning weight total? What would you expect the winning weight to be from this event?
Like I said, under normal conditions, if we didn't have this hurricane coming in, I'd say you're looking at probably upper 50s to win the tournament, like anywhere between 57, 59. I'd be surprised if it took over 20 a day in September at Rayburn. That would really surprise me, but I still think somebody is going to go out there and catch like a 24, 26-pound bag one day and back it up with two mid-teen stringers the next 2 days. So I think it's going to be right around that 57-pound mark for 3 days if I had to guess. Upper teens every day.
Gotcha. And what about to make is it the top 12 cut or top 10? I think it's top 12 cut, right?
Man, top 12 cut after 2 days. I'd say you're probably looking at upper 20s. I'd say if you get 14 to 15 pounds a day, you're going to be knocking on that door pretty close. It's and like I said, it's September, and we're talking. Everybody says Rayburn. Yeah, I mean Rayburn is not the same in September as it is in March. So I think 14, 15 pounds a day will get you fishing on day 3.
Awesome. We'll see if those predictions are right. Hopefully, you'll be sitting pretty in the top 12 and kind of get revenge on that last tournament on Kerr, Arkansas River. But it's pretty cool that we're going to be able to actually see your performance. And we'll talk to you guys after the tournament. We're not posting this video until after the tournament. Obviously, you've seen that now, guys. But we're also going to do a follow-up video with footage of Randy's practice, of his tournament days, break it all down for you. And we're also going to have Matt Pangrat from Bass Talk Live, who's also fishing the Open, and he's going to talk about his strategy. And I actually might throw my hat in the ring too, Randy, and show you guys how I might prepare for this tournament, just in case you're interested, because I feel like I would do it in a different way. Maybe I can talk to you and Matt and see if what I was talking about, what I was doing, was productive based on what you see, from what our guys are talking about. So I think it'd be kind of cool to get 3 different perspectives on one tournament, and hopefully that'll be helpful for all you guys.
Yep, sounds great, man.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, guys, for joining us, and we will be back with Randy's tournament recap video very soon. So thanks for checking out the video. We'll see you all next one.